Okay, Matthew chapter 28, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it." And, when you think about what Pastor was talking about on Friday with a stone that could have been as much as 2 tons easily, and he just moves the stone and sits on it. That's marvelous. Well, it says, "His appearance was like lightning, his clothing white as snow, and for fear of him the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the woman, 'Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I've told you.' So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings.' And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me.' While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, 'Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.' So they took the money and did as they were directed, and this story has been spread among the Jews to this day." We'll get into that part of it in a moment, in a few minutes. But kind of what I want to do is, because here these guards are told what to say, and they apparently did spread the story, at least to some degree, and they kept going around for a while. But that's not the only thing that has come up regarding whether the resurrection of Christ actually happened. So what I wanted to do, keeping this passage in mind, is bring forth some of the arguments that have been raised against the resurrection, and your job is to tell me what's wrong with those things. And Pastor, I've talked about some of these, so don't say anything just yet. Especially one in particular. But one of the biggest arguments that can be made is miracle. It would be a miracle if he rose from the dead, and miracles can't happen. David Hume, the great philosopher, proved that beyond any doubt. How would you argue that? Why?
Because miracles do happen. Jesus lives.
Okay.
Humans are trying to live humans, not God.
Okay. What kind of assumptions have to be made to make that kind of an argument? To make an argument that miracles cannot happen, what kind of assumptions do they have to make in the background?
That there is no God.
Could be. Now, they might admit there's a God, but in many cases, they will say there's no God, so miracles can't happen. That implies, then, that the whole universe is basically a closed system. That it just can't have changes in it other than what you see going on, and those are things that we can observe.
Miracles can't happen when nothing can fall, because nothing can change nothing. That's a miracle.
They'll argue that matter has always existed, and that the universe fluctuates between coming into existence, then going out of existence. And
Man and woman wouldn't be.
So how did man come into being if there was no miracle? How did the Big Bang theory happen if nothing happened?
you're getting into questions that they can't truly answer.
Here's the thing that disproves all of your theories that Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Tell me another time in history where men willingly died to tell a lie.
Can't use that argument yet. Cannot use that argument
How
yet.
many men willingly died to tell the lie that Jesus?
We'll get there. We'll get there. Go ahead, Kim.
There were many people, thousands of people that saw Jesus walk in. So
We'll get to that too.
What are you trying to get at?
No, what I'm saying is that they're making the argument that miracles cannot happen, but that makes the assumption either that there is no God, or that there is a God, but he either cannot or will not interfere in what he's made. Now, what does Scripture tell us? God not only can, but does. Who made the axe head float? Ultimately, who did it? It was God, not the prophet that was used by God. But God, in the long run, he used the prophet to do it. But God is the one who made it happen. Axe heads don't float. At least I've never seen one that did. Where did the manna come from? Explain that by natural processes. You cannot do it.
According to natural processes, objects always fall and go up. What did you say?
There's gravity.
Gravity.
Means objects always fall. They don't go up. They don't go up. They always go down.
And why did they fall?
In a closed system, yes. But my arm is pushing on a hook. That's not a closed system. I'm not erasing the law of gravity. I'm just pushing on the hook.
Yep.
Well, just a man. Can't work miracles. Yes, that's the point.
Carl, it goes back to when I was
Or used to, I should say.
teaching the name of Christ, and I brought up what is darkness?
The absence of light.
What is cold?
Something I don't like. Absence of heat.
There is nothing that produces cold. There's
just-
nothing that produces darkness. Naturally, there is nothing that produces cold. Cold is the absence of heat. Darkness is the absence of light.
So,
No people is the absence of God. Wait, that's here though.
the assumptions that need to be made to say that miracles cannot happen are just that, assumptions that God disproves in his word and by his actions throughout history that we've seen over and over again. So, argument...
Fundamentally, they're not arguing that God doesn't exist. They're assuming it
Exactly.
from the start. It's a presumption, it's an assertion, not a proof. In other words, they don't come say that miracles are impossible out of evidence. They have decided already that the universe is a closed system, therefore miracles are impossible.
And that's like trying to argue with someone that says that evolution happened. And they'll tell you, you believe in the Bible, prove to me that God exists. Okay, prove to me that evolution happened. Well, science says, no, that's not proof. That's a scientific theory. Well, yeah,
But prove it.
and then they'll bring another scientist theory up and another scientist theory up to prove the theory of somebody else's. That's not proof. All that is one theory that is validating or trying to validate another theory they're trying to validate, and it's not proof.
And even if they admit that there is or may be a God, they are still assuming that he either cannot or will not function in ways to change things. So, Pastor's exactly right. These are assumptions, not based on any evidence whatsoever. Now, argument number 2. Well, the women went to the wrong tomb.
That's stupid.
Why?
It
Couldn't
was-
they have? It was dark.
They knew where.
But Angie, finish.
They knew where the soldiers were. They went to where the soldiers were guarding.
Were the soldiers even there at that point?
Soldiers were guarding the wrong
Well, they were
We'll get to
laid
that.
on
Were
the
the- were
ground
the-
like dead men. I would assume they were laying there like passed out or something.
I'll bet they were gone by that time.
It depends on the timing. If they had already seen the angel come down and woken up, left.
We'll get to that as a part of this whole thing, but I would argue that by the time the women got there, the soldiers had got over their terror enough that we're out of here.
That's not what it said, that's not the way it sounds in this chapter, or in this,
To me, it sounds like they're laying there.
it says.
It may be.
Timing, we don't know the
You do,
timing.
but you don't know all of the timing, and there is nothing in any of the Gospels that indicates that those soldiers were still there. I personally think they fled. They were terrified at the start, and it says they became like dead men because here's this angel, and he moves the rock. Jesus, we don't even know if they saw Jesus because they were so scared. And I think the women came shortly thereafter, but the guys were gone by that time.
No,
I think.
they weren't.
I can't prove
No,
that.
they weren't, because it says, this is talking about the angel, his appearance was, well, it says here, that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb, and behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow, and for fear of him, guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, so the women were there when the guards were laying there.
Not necessarily.
No.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, I'm glad it does, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, read the other Gospels,
taken
you
off.
don't know exact timing. But in any event,
But does this
what
say
are,
I have to read the other
forget
Gospels?
whether they were there or not at this point.
Yes.
Forget whether they were there or not. Why couldn't the women have gone to the wrong tomb?
Because Angie said they went to the tomb where the soldiers were.
If you go back to chapter 27,
I was gonna say, didn't they go with spices?
well, that was going in the morning.
27.
But when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate, asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. What does the rest say? Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting where? Opposite the
They
tomb.
knew where it was.
Verse, go ahead.
And you're going to, of course, argue with me. In such a traumatic event, when they actually saw where the body was, they happened to forget. When you go through an event of great trauma, you don't forget what happens.
Exactly.
No.
And certainly not 3 days later.
That's etched into your mind, basically.
It was, and they, after all, they were living in Jerusalem. It's not like they just moved in and didn't know where they were. They were already living there.
Yeah.
And they were around Jesus for 3 years, give or take, whatever. And if Joseph was a follower, they probably knew Joseph of Arimathea.
Could be. We'll talk more about him later, too. Go ahead, Kim.
So it says that Pilate took it and had a seal put around the tomb. It doesn't say what that seal is, but could that seal have, when it was moved, it was broken, could that seal be visible on the ground or
Yes.
still hanging
Most
on the
likely.
ground or whatever?
The kind of seal it most likely would have been a rope sealed by wax. And so they would seal it, and then they would put a rope around it, and they would seal it with wax, with hot wax, of course. The hot wax, sort of melts
Yeah,
into the
melts into
rock
the
there,
rock.
so that if the stone is moved for any reason
Pops
at all,
loose.
the wax breaks and the rope falls off, but it's going to be there on the ground,
Yeah.
or on the ground.
But it doesn't mention it here.
No, it doesn't, but it did say, it does tell us that it was
It
sealed.
doesn't say, right.
There's a lot of things that we're not told in these, in any of the accounts.
That's
Yeah.
why people assume things.
Aha, yes. So,
And that's why.
that leads us to the one from Matthew 28. The disciples stole the body.
Oh,
That's where Bob's argument comes in a great deal. In the first place, when did they have time? And what was their emotional state after Jesus died?
they were afraid.
It wasn't very good.
Yeah, it wasn't very good. They were afraid. Do you really think that these guys went away, first of all, plotted during the night to come and steal the body, overcame the guards? Well, the other guards actually weren't there the first night. They didn't come till the next day.
Oh, really?
Because, yeah, well, that's what it says. You know, that, where is it here?
The next day.
Yeah, it was the next day.
Right.
So they would have had to come during that night to steal the body. And these guys are terrified of this. Now, if they steal the body, what are they going to do with it?
It'll be somewhere.
It has to be somewhere. And what Bob said earlier comes into play. All of a sudden are these guys, 11 guys, who know, I mean, they've seen the guy who raised people from the dead as well as all the other miracles. They've seen him do all of this, but they know he died on a cross. They know he died. This is the guy that they thought was their Messiah. And you think they're going to all of a sudden go out, 11 guys, and knowingly perpetrate a fraud that is going to, at some point, get probably 10 of those 11 guys, because John was still alive, we know, later on, but at least a good share of those men are going to die. Do you really think that that none of them would ever say, wait a minute, no, we perpetrated a fraud here?
For the rest of
Somebody would have.
For the rest of their life.
For the rest of their lives. Go ahead, Janet.
First of all, I think that 10 guys could take those 2 centurions. Second of all, those guys were in their right minds, so they could have put together a plan, because look at Peter. He denied Christ 3 times. 3 times he denied him.
It wasn't
Many
two
of
Because he
centurions.
wasn't in his right mind either.
Okay. Pastor's going to talk to the guard issue.
It wasn't 2 centurions.
Oh, I
A
thought it were 2
regular,
soldiers.
a regular group of soldiers would actually be 16.
But they said 2 soldiers, I thought.
No, there's
No, just said soldiers.
just said soldiers.
Just said soldiers. Has to be at least 2.
The pictures,
But
the
the
sheet,
normal-
the
yes, the
pictures
pictures
in the
are on
kids'
the-
stories always
But
show
the normal
two.
pattern would be a squad of 16 full would be on watch at any given time. The other 12 would have been sleeping.
Somewhere nearby.
Sleeping
I'm just saying that people
around,
assume.
around them as well. And those those soldiers, which were most likely Roman soldiers,
Yes.
they could have been temple guards, but they were most likely Roman soldiers. They were supposed to be able to hold that piece of ground against an entire army. They were armed in a way the disciples were not. The disciples had 2 swords among the 11 of them. These were 16 fully armed and armored Roman soldiers. 11 ordinary men could not have taken them out.
No, you couldn't even surprise them to take them
Of
out.
course, even if they could have, they couldn't have, because their emotional status.
Yeah.
No, they physically could not have taken out these Roman soldiers.
Okay, so the disciples obviously didn't steal the body. So somebody else must have. Somebody else must have come in, stolen the body for whatever reason, maybe for some magical rites. Believe it or not, that is a theory that has been out there.
Really?
There is absolutely nothing anywhere in history that would indicate that. Nothing, not even a hint.
What about the soldiers doing something?
Do they want to survive?
The soldiers
They
likely
would
denied.
die. Yeah.
I'm just kidding, but.
Yeah.
Stories here.
Well, and actually, some of that theory is going to come up because it's been brought up, but a bit later. But it's not likely. The idea that somebody else stole the body is useless.
You
It's a,
don't think that those soldiers weren't taken back in the room or even tortured to find out if they knew anything about it?
I don't think so.
No, they were given money to go and tell
Because-
the story.
Because they said the right words to the right people to save their skin. Ordinarily, they would have been taken, yes. But in this case, I don't think they were, because they were
No,
given
I'm not saying they
Yeah.
were killed, but I'm saying that they didn't, that their superiors didn't say, okay, who paid you or what did you do to, to allow someone to release the body or, they would have been questioned.
That was normal.
Very,
This-
very
this-
rigorously questioned.
This wasn't normal. The right palm were greased way up at the top, so I don't think there's any
and the Jewish leadership generally tried hard to get along with the Romans, even though they didn't like them. So I think what Pastor is saying is probably highly appropriate. The right palms were greased in such a way that it just kind of disappeared from the scene, and they let the story go.
Did the Pharisees and Sadducees have the right to order the Roman soldiers to go and do that?
No.
Or did they have to ask for permission to order the soldiers?
That's why they did ask permission.
Okay. That's what I'm wondering.
They don't normally have the right. Pilate gave them a guard and since Pilate gave them a guard, that gave them temporary authority to do exactly that. But under normal circumstances, no.
So, next theory. The Jewish authorities had the body removed. That's, believe it or not, that's a
I
theory.
already said the
Why
soldiers, they
would
would have
the Jewish authorities do something to lend credence or lend to a figure that they wanted to discredit? If they did something like that, imagine what it would do to the authenticity of Jesus' claim to be the Son of God.
And you have another thing in there that even with the women going to the wrong tomb, all somebody had to do from the Jewish leadership side is produce the gardener who would have known where the tomb was. So why would the Jewish leaders remove a body and take the quote unquote chance that somehow people are going to think that, yep, he rose from the dead? They don't want him to rise from the dead. And Pastor, I know you got a good comment here, so go for
They
it.
took the trouble. Why would they undermine their own murder by stealing the body?
Exactly.
It just
Makes no sense.
It's historically verifiable that they killed him. Even secular historians agree with that.
So did
And so
Jesus,
they have absolutely no motive to steal the body. They have every motive to produce the body
Yep.
if someone else has that approach.
So, next theory. The Roman government had the body removed. The question would be, why? They don't care. He's gone. You know, I mean, granted, and Pastor made a really good point on Friday, that Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. But why would he even care where the body is at that point? If they even knew where the body was. We don't know that, you know, until the soldiers went, we don't know how much Pilate was involved in that, or any of the other authorities. Make it quick. I want to get to one.
forget it, go ahead.
Okay, so Joseph of Arimathea had the body put in this tomb. Maybe he had it moved so that he and his family could be buried there later. He didn't want somebody else's body in his tomb.
Why would he agree to have Jesus buried there
in the first place.
And what did it tell us that he was? A disciple of Jesus. Somebody who at some point apparently began to follow and had high regard. Wouldn't he be honored even with a man that he thought was going to be the Messiah, who's now dead, doesn't have any necessary expectation that he's going to rise from the dead? Wouldn't it be an honor to have his body in your tomb?
Oh, yeah.
Now, why then would he move it? No sense at all. So, next theory. These guys, just all these hallucinations, all these people just thought they saw Jesus. They didn't really see him.
So they were
It was too
You just hit on a key. Too many people. 500 at one shot. There's no such thing as that kind of mass hallucination.
So why didn't Jesus and God put a thing, I mean, I'm assuming that, I think they did because of all these things that are not possible. But why didn't they make it absolutely possible, or, probable, that there was no way anybody could do any of these things, or think any of these things?
He did. It's just people will come up with endless explanations when they come up with it.
Exactly. Well, you know, if you stop and think, what did Pastor talk about Friday when he was commenting on one of the New Testament texts? When the Jews saw Jesus on the cross, the Jewish leaders, what did they say? If you are really the Messiah, do what? Come down.
Yeah.
come down from the cross.
Doesn't that remind you of another biblical story from Luke chapter 16, where a man is in hell and says, I want you,
Oh, take
he wants one of his brothers to come back. And what was he told? Even if somebody rises from the dead. Those Jewish leaders would not have believed Jesus if he got down off the cross, and it's a good, and you made an excellent point. It's a good thing he didn't. Because, and I'll comment on that later, but it's a really good thing he didn't. And
Because none of us would be here.
maybe Paul had a big hallucination. Stop and think about who Paul was and what he was out to do.
We have Paul's writings. These are not the words of a crazy person.
No.
So even if they had mass hallucinations in one area, how do you have people in one area and another area hallucinating the same thing at the same time?
You don't.
You don't.
And people who tend to believe hallucinations and base their whole life on it are crazy. We have their writings. These are not the words of crazy people.
No.
But what I'm saying is, you've got Jesus appearing in two locations at the same time.
You don't have multiple
You
hallucinations.
can have people in an area that are ingesting some kind of hallucinogenic drug that may have, a mass hallucination, but you're not going to have people in another area hallucinating the same thing at the same time.
Kim, you had a comment?
What do you do with all the people that were raised from the dead?
Well, that's another thing.
About that.
What?
What happened to all those people that were raised from the dead? Did they go on living?
Probably for a while, then they died again.
Well, I just thought that was kind of weird. I meant to ask that.
Never.
yesterday.
They're never really told.
It's, that one line is interesting. I guess I can
Yeah.
comment on it because it's
Nothing's ever said about it.
Yeah, nothing is ever said anywhere else.
No.
When I heard or read that, I thought they meant that the graves just pulled up out of earth. I didn't actually
No,
think that they
no.
were raised up.
The
People
people
People.
went, the dead people rose and appeared to many in the city.
Yeah,
Yep.
what they look like.
No, they were resurrected, not zombies.
Yeah,
They were recognizable.
that's what it is.
They were recognizable, no, they weren't zombies, they weren't reanimated corpses, they were people that came back to life.
Can you imagine the families freaking out?
I imagine it would have been a surprise to people. Go ahead, Kim.
And you also have the length of time that Jesus was walking around talking and showing himself
Yeah.
to multitudes more.
Just think of his disciples. 40 days. And we're told infallible proofs. It was obvious to them this man is really alive. So, next theory. The whole story was just fabricated by somebody. Well, Pastor just addressed that issue. We don't have the words of crazy people. People who are out to perpetuate some kind of a fraud. This is the truth.
It's too many things there.
Real quick, Bob, and then we're going to spend some time on the last theory here.
So here's my question with the hallucination thing. What did Jesus tell Thomas?
Touch me.
Touch
Put your hands here.
Put your hands
Put your
in
hand in my
My
side.
side, all that.
And it doesn't say it, but you can infer from what he said that those wounds weren't bandaged. And they probably weren't bleeding, and there was probably nothing coming out of them. How does that happen to a live person? It's pierced like that.
It's clearly, the kind of wound we're talking about is non-survivable. The soldier's jab wasn't a little jab on the surface, it went all the way down.
Okay, you're going to ruin my next theory.
But even if it
But-
wasn't, there still would have been blood
Yeah.
or
Something oozing out of it.
oozing.
All right, it should have
Because
hurt.
that's not bleeding.
Yeah.
It's not bleeding.
And then you had, nails through the.
That's what I mean, yeah, they,
Okay, so the last theory. Jesus just passed out and swung on the cross. I'll tell you, that was, now you virtually never hear that theory
They
anymore.
They
and then
never
what,
understood
he
about
woke up in the tomb and he
Well, now,
pushed the rock
let's-
out of the way
hold-
and got out on his own.
Back off. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. But think about this. That has actually been, and you don't hear it anymore because, and Pastor made a really good point. There's a guy who writes a lot of stuff about Christianity by the name of Bart Ehrman. He is actually classified as an atheist. And he admits that Jesus died on the cross, along with a lot of other people like this, and just flat out secular historians who say Jesus died on the cross. But now think about what Pastor was talking about on Friday. Think about what it involves. And I want to go into some real thinking on this, because some of the things here play into some of these other arguments as well. Jesus and his disciples have a Passover meal together. They leave. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane. I seriously doubt that they spent their time as they walked eating and drinking stuff. So how much have they had at this point? Probably little to nothing. Jesus gets into the Garden of Gethsemane. Tells his disciples, he's got, just stay, behave yourselves, all that stuff. I got to go pray. And what does Luke tell us he was doing? Sweating heavily. Now, whether it was actual blood or whether it was sweat that looked as heavy as blood, whole different argument, doesn't matter for our purposes. What it does tell me is that Jesus is already experiencing some physical distress. What happens when your body loses water? You dehydrate. He leaves Gethsemane. He's arrested. He's taken to a number of different trials. He's before the Jewish leaders. He's before Pilate. He's before Herod. He's back before Pilate. All the rest of this stuff. How much has he had to eat or drink during this time? The physical distress that's being caused. Now, all of a sudden, people start hitting him, pulling his beard, jamming a crown of thorns on his head. They take that nice, wonderful piece of the cat o' nine tails, essentially, and they're shredding. And by the way, not only did they a lot of times go from the shoulders to here to the waist, a lot of times they went clear down to the back of the knee. And Pastor made another really good point on Friday. Many times people died before they ever got to be crucified. Now, what's happening to your body during this time? You're losing bodily fluids. You're dehydrating even worse, plus the other things that are occurring to your body inside that you can't even see. They tell him that he's got to carry this, at very least the crossbeam, on the cross, out to where he's supposed to be crucified. He doesn't make it all the way. They have to have somebody else, Simon the Cyrene, come and take that part to finish it off, because he can't do it. He's getting that weak. He gets there. Crosses, if he was only the crossbeam, they finish putting the cross together, he's grabbed and probably not very gently slammed down on the back of on his back on this cross. Can you imagine the pain that would cause? Now, a lot of pictures you'll see when Jesus is crucified is like this. The reality is it was probably more like this. And the feet, again, it depends, because the feet probably were not nailed directly to the vertical part, but there was generally, it's a lot of times, a little platform there that they were nailed or tied to, because occasionally they used ropes, would be nailed to that, so that a person, as he was going, his legs start to give out, he's hanging. And you know what happens when you hang by your arms? It puts pressure on your lungs, and you can't breathe well. And the farther up your arms go, the harder it is to breathe. During World War II, the Germans would sometimes do this to people and hang them like this and watch them die, and it didn't take very long. So, here you are, you're nailed, and by the way, those nails usually were driven through the wrists, not the hands, because the hands rarely could actually hold everything. But the wrist would be considered part of the hand, and they made sure, obviously, not to puncture the major blood vessels in there. We don't want the person bleeding to death. So he's hanging, partly by his wrist, but also with his feet. When the legs start giving out, the arms come up, and you have a hard time breathing. And sooner or later, you have to breathe, so you push yourself up. And by the way, whether the nails went through this way on the feet, or there was one that they actually found the bones of a person who had been crucified, and you've got the foot here and the heel down here, and the nails had been driven through this way. So they were in that case, there may not have been any little platform there. They may have been actually jammed into the sides. In any event, when you raise yourself up, it hurts. But you have to raise yourself up to breathe. You get a couple, 3 breaths, and you're back down again because your legs are giving out. They're hurting. And this is over and over again. And you may try to keep your back off that cross, but you're probably not going to be able to do it forever. And as Pastor mentioned, crucifixions could last anywhere from hours to 3, 4, even 5 days. Now, if you were out there for 4 or 5 days, what's happening during the daytime? Sunshine. Bright sunshine, which is affecting you even more. We're just talking about the physical aspects. Now, the part that none of us can really grasp is the weight of Jesus bearing our sin and what that was doing to him as an individual. So, we're going to just assume for a moment that the swoon theory is correct. And Jesus just passed out. That means that Roman soldier who walked up with the spear kind of just went a couple times to make sure that the body was really dead, and he really didn't jab him all the way. You have to assume that to have that theory come even close to being correct. Once again, Roman soldiers' lives depended on their doing their jobs, and these are professional killers. Go
You
ahead.
can't go more than 3 days without water.
Yeah, you can. People can go up to 7 days without water under the right circumstances. You
Well,
can.
That's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there.
Well, yeah,
Because
but
Jesus was only on the cross for 3 hours.
He was only on the cross 6 hours.
right, but how long had he been tortured, how long had the Roman soldiers had him before they put him on the cross?
Well, not that long, because
Not long enough-
Thursday night into Friday.
Had his life taken from him.
So, in any event, you would have to think that obviously this Roman soldier wouldn't have done his job. So Jesus passes out on the cross. Now, if in fact his arms started off at an angle like this, and all of a sudden he can't hold himself up because he's passed out, those arms are coming up harder and higher and stretching, do you think he can breathe well? No. Now, again, we're making the assumption for the moment that the theory is correct. It's not. We're just making that assumption. Joseph of Arimathea is either at the cross or he's got people at the cross for him keeping track of this. In any event, Jesus dies, or appears to die in this case, because we're going with that theory for the moment. He appears to die at this case. And so either Joseph goes to Pilate right off the bat, or his servants come to him and say, yep, Jesus is dead, and then he goes to Pilate. Pilate says, dead? This quick? Grabs one of his lackeys and says, go get the centurion that was involved in a crucifixion. So he goes to get the centurion. Centurion comes back. Pilate says, is he really dead? Yeah, he's dead. Okay, Joseph, you can have the body. How long does this take? Anybody know the world's record for breath holding?
Like 5 minutes or something.
What's that? Nope, 27 or 24 minutes and 37 seconds.
That was after breathing pure oxygen.
And a lot of training in addition to that.
And plus a lot of training.
A lot of training and breathing pure oxygen.
And someone would be at the absolute peak of physical performance. He hadn't been flogged.
Yes. So, here you have this guy on a cross who's dropped into the down position, which means he ain't going to be breathing very long. And he's certainly not going to hold his breath that long. Because undoubtedly, this entire transaction took an hour or more to get done. Then they wrap this body in some clothes. They put him in the tomb, which is pretty well going to be dark and dank and not a nice necessarily place to be. And this big heavy stone is rolled in the front. And now all of a sudden, somewhere, you've got 2 scenarios here. Scenario number 1, first night, Friday night. Jesus somehow pops awake. manages to worm his way out of these grave clothes, folds them up real neatly, manages to get over and find the door because it's dark and it's hard to see, but he finds where this rock is and moves 2 tons all by himself
After going through all that.
after going through all of this other stuff. Then manages to go to where he obviously knew the disciples were going to be and convinces them that he's risen from the dead. Hogwash. Scenario number 2. Jesus is there all the rest of Friday, all of Saturday. Who's outside the tomb on Saturday and Saturday night? Roman soldiers. So now, Jesus, after all of this incredible punishment, and all of the things that have just physically alone gone on with his body, missing the whole part of his carrying our sin, but just the physical aspects. He's there after the Friday crucifixion. He's there Friday night into Saturday, all day Saturday, Sunday morning. Now he wakes up and does all this and rolls it aside and overcomes 16 Roman guards.
Yeah.
Wow, one guy.
After not having drunk anything for like 3 to 4 days.
Yeah. And all of the rest of this, and then he goes and convinces these people, his disciples, that he's alive. That's one of the reasons why this theory has finally, smartly, fallen out of style, because it's absolutely ridiculous. Anybody who brings that, if somebody were to bring that theory up today, I would say one of 2 things to that person. One, you really don't understand what crucifixion is and what somebody has gone through. Or, number 2, you're being deliberately deceitful because you know better. It's one of the 2. There are no other choices. You either don't understand it or you are deliberately deceitful. There is no way it could happen. And if Jesus swooned on the cross, his words, "It is finished," are absolutely meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. There is no theory against the resurrection that can hold water. I like this.
I think that at the Last Supper, him and the disciples planned it out ahead of time.
Oh,
And that was
brother.
their plan. He was going to act like he was.
Sure.
If they crucify you, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting tidbit of history, and then we're going
None of
to...
us would teach Christians either that happened.
Here's an
Yeah,
interesting
it
tidbit of
does.
history. The Jewish historian Josephus got word that 3 people he knew were being crucified. He went to the Roman authorities, which he had obviously a fairly good relationship with him, and talked to whoever it was that was high up and said, "I'd really like it if you get these guys off the crosses." That Roman authority gave permission for all 3 of those people to be removed off the crosses and treated by Roman doctors. 2 of them still died. There is no documented evidence of anybody who has ever been crucified who survived it unaided. None. Anywhere in history. Kim.
Harold, when we're doing stuff, we pull muscles in our back, we can barely move. And we move cautiously, and it hurts. And there's things that we're not doing anymore because we've screwed up our back. To get whipped with the cat of 9 tails and have your muscles ripped apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if you could be persuaded that somehow he did manage all of that, a man in that condition is going to be barely alive. That's supposed to inspire confidence?
Yeah.
Sure.
You know,
But
Go
like I
back-
said, none of us would be Christians either.
exactly. Well, and that's...
So that's the issue. We have evidence of what happens when a messianic movement, when the leader of a messianic movement dies and doesn't come back to life. It's happened in history.
I was
Yep.
going to say, how many messiahs were there before Jesus that
Around that time, I'm not sure how many. Yeah. Gamaliel in Acts chapter 5 gives us the movements.
Yeah.
All the ones he was aware of at the time. I think there were more after this.
Yeah. There were quite a few.
Yes. And
and none of them
every
last
someone rises up, claims to be somebody, builds a following, hundreds or thousands of people, and then the Romans come and squash it with extreme prejudice, because that's what they do.
No.
And every single time after the death of the leader, they all just melt it like here.
Exactly.
And
There
how
is
many-
only one exception.
And how many of those messianic figures did anybody go to their grave still claiming that that person was the Messiah?
Zero.
Exactly.
Absolutely no one. They all just melted away. The entire religion just died immediately on the death of the leader.
Even the security, surely, this was necessary.
So, back to Matthew chapter 28 for a moment. And let's see, verse 5. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified, for he is not here, for he is risen as he said." I still love the old Don Francisco song, "He's alive." Chorus goes, "He's alive, he's alive, he's alive, and I'm forgiven. Heaven's gates are open wide." What a great song. You know, I don't know a great deal about what Francisco is doing these days and don't really care, but that's one of the best songs, as far as I'm concerned, that was ever written about the resurrection. Makes a really good point. Jesus Christ is alive. You can go through the whole nation of Israel and you will never find his bones in a tomb because he's not there. He's seated at the right hand of the Father. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for the Lord Jesus Christ, for what he did in dying on the cross for us. Father, we know he didn't have to. He chose to do so. We thank you for that. We thank you that he rose from the grave, proving that he is exactly who he said he is. Just ask now that you would dismiss us from this hour, put your blessing upon our worship service to follow. In Jesus' name we'd ask it. Amen.